Brown from Huntington, West Virginia. Also Corduroy Brown on stage, on or off, depending on how you know me. I'm a musician at heart. I've played music since 2008. And if you're not seeing me somewhere downtown in Huntington at work, you're seeing me somewhere on a stage around the tri-state, all these 3 states around us. Yeah, so when I first realized that COVID was serious, I was actually working at WSAZ at the time, local news station, and just like anything else, we started talking about it in news, and I was thinking, first thoughts were, okay, this is gonna come and go, no big deal. Fast forward to 2 years later, we're experienced all kinds of crazy things around the globe from COVID itself. And I think we've learned a ton about it. My personal experience with COVID was no joke at all. That's when I knew it was a very serious thing. There's people literally losing their life from COVID and complications. And when I had my whole part of being on life support in 2020 and 2021, actually, that's when I knew it really was no joke. Yeah, so when I had COVID, it actually wasn't a very bad deal for me. When I physically had, positive tests from COVID, it felt more like a cold. It just felt like, my body was tired. I was sniffling and my nose was kind of stuffy and stuff like that. And I actually had, taken time off work, obviously, because I didn't want to spread it. Go back to work about a month later. And that's when it got really, really scary. I remember going to work on a Thursday and my lymph node in the side of my neck here on my left side was huge one day. And I was like, that's kind of weird. And I just felt a little off, you just feel. So I went to an urgent care and they were like, hey, we want to do some blood work on you because you're just checking stuff. You don't have COVID anymore, but your breathing's kind of weird. And so they do some blood work. My white blood cell count was through the roof. And they're like, you should probably go to the hospital just to get checked out. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to the ER. Just if you guys can just give me antibiotics, this will pass in a week, whatever it is. Well, I was being very stubborn because I ended up going to the hospital the next day because I was throwing up so violently. My kidneys, I'll never forget that pain. It just felt like they were just getting crushed. I mean, my kidneys were feeling awful. And this was a Thursday and we fast forward to a Saturday and I hadn't eaten yet because I can't. I'm just constantly getting sick and throwing up. So I go to the hospital, and the first time I went to the hospital, they said, hey, we're just gonna give you some anti-nausea medicine. You need to relax. Here's some anxiety medicine. That's why your breathing's messed up. We don't think it's anything. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm stopping throwing up finally, and they give me anxiety medicine. So just I'm really chilled out. I go home 3 hours later after that stuff's wearing off, I'm throwing up again. And I could just feel my body just not jiving properly. I go back to the hospital the next day and I finally get admitted. That's on a Sunday, I think. Fast forward a couple more days, I still haven't eaten. I'm still in a hospital bed. My lungs at this point are failing badly. And it's such a weird, helpless feeling when you can't take a full breath. It's just you can't do anything with it. You can't do anything. And at this point, the doctors are sped up now. There's a little bit more urgency going on. And you're starting to think okay, I'm not dead and we're good. I'm texting a couple of my friends hey, I'm in the hospital, whatever. And I remember going back to, I used to work at WSAZ and I was watching the 6 a.m. news, which I used to direct the 6 a.m. news. Hadn't been there in a couple of years. So I text my friend that produces the show. Hey man, I'm watching your stuff. I'm watching your show. Send him a funny text. I miss working with you, man. About that time, the doctor comes in and says, hey, Mr. Brown, we have to put you on a ventilator. And I said, why? And they're like, well, right now your organs are failing. And I said, what organs? They said, there are 4 of them. And I said, I have 4 organs failing? Yeah, your heart is in acute failure right now. Your lungs are really, really bad. Your liver and your kidneys are showing signs of failure right now. We have to put you on a ventilator. And I was like, you're kidding. And they're like, no, right now. So I call my parents and say, hey, this is what's happening. And my lungs were so weak that it almost felt like a dream. I could feel myself like, I don't think I've explained this before, but I could feel myself when they were wheeling me down, they put on the vent, fading in and out. I don't know if that was of consciousness or like I had met this time where I felt so helpless that I was accepting that I might not wake up again. And it's weird because I had talked to a chaplain the night before. I had talked to so many doctors that were saying, we don't know right now. It's not looking good. So as I'm getting wheeled down to be put on a vent, I remember this nurse's face. There was 3 people on both sides of me. And I remember the nurse's face, and she was looking at me she was hopeless. She had nothing. She didn't have any hope there. She was just wheeling my body down there at that point. I remember looking at her and just barely, like, again, my eyes, I could just feel myself closing in and out as I'm getting wheeled down there. And I guess what happened then is, like, my parents made a decision, like, and the hospital said, hey, he's got to go somewhere. He's dying if he stays in here. He's got to go to a special somewhere. So WVU, Ruby Memorial Hospital, had one opening. And they weren't supposed to, because they had this is how I know I'm still supposed to be here. Because there are 3 major things that happened that showed, okay, I still got places to go here. Is Ruby Memorial in Morgantown had one COVID room left, a cardiovascular specialist COVID room, which is what I was going through, that they had previously stopped taking patients for. But they made an exception for me. And the pilots that flew the medevac helicopter said, we shouldn't fly today. It's windy, but we will if we make a decision now. And on top of that, like, there was a nurse at the hospital here that said, he's got to go now. He can't stay here anymore. Those 3 things, I just think about that sometimes. If that nurse that said, hey, go, take him somewhere now, wouldn't have been there. If she would have got a flat tire or something, like, they wouldn't have made that decision and I wouldn't have went anywhere. And there was a room specifically for what I had, which was COVID, cardiovascular failure stuff, that wasn't supposed to be accepting patients, but then magically they made an exception. That one specific day, they said, yeah, we'll take it. So those 3 small things were giant things, and a slew of so many other things. But anyway, so, I don't remember the helicopter ride, obviously, because I'm sedated and put on a vent. But I will say the thing that people don't realize is that when they talk about dying, and you hear it in movies, like they say, like they see like a white light and all that stuff, that's completely real. I remember seeing that. I was in a completely infinite white space. As far as I could see, there's just infinite white around me. And I could see my own body. And there was like this little, I hate calling it like a ball of energy, but that's what it was. It was something here that was on my left side of my chest. And I watched it. It was so close to me at first. And I couldn't interact with it, but I could acknowledge that that was my life for somehow and wherever I was. And I watched it start. It was real close to me on my chest side and slowly went way, 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 way out into the infinite white. And then I woke up in Morgantown, how many days later, and talking to the doctors saying, hey, Mr. Brown, you're in Morgantown. We are weaning you off life support right now. And the rest is a whole other story on the other side of that. So one of the most incredible feelings, it's still something I think about every day, honestly. It was when I remember waking up in Morgantown, and I don't remember, I went back and looked at all kinds of text messages that people had sent me, and I had responded somehow, and I don't remember much of that because there's so much going on and so much all that. But I remember when I finally got a few days of clarity, when I finally got taken off life support and was completely, my body was kind of coming back to itself finally, is that I had opened Facebook and I remember my phone being literally hot because it was constantly ringing and buzzing and notifications and all that. I remember that. I could feel it in the bed. And I was like, I was like, man, my phone is hot. It's going off so much. And I looked at Facebook and there was a GoFundMe that had been started. And within 2 days, it had $30,000 in it. And I don't get that. I don't really still have words for that, because that many people reached out and said, we want to help. That many people said, Alan, we care about you. Because that is not a cheap hospital stay, as you can imagine. The helicopter alone was some ungodly amount of money, and thank God for insurance and the donations that people gave from this. There were people all over the freaking country that were donating to help. And that's maybe that's good karma. Maybe that's because I've helped in the past or whatever it is. But I will never forget that feeling of waking up and seeing the outpouring of love that people said, hey, we got you. As far as the creative side and how that helped me push through COVID, you know, when we were making an album at the time when I got sick, it was mostly recorded. Jeffrey McClellan was recording it and mixing and mastering it. And the album ended up being called Let Me Know. And the whole idea with that is that so many people, just like when I was in the hospital in my entire life, had always said that phrase, you know, let me know. And if you think about it, that's a really authentic thing to say if you mean it, because it's saying, let me know how I can be of service to you. Let me know what you need. Let me know how I can improve your life. Creativity, honestly, is something that never goes away. From the time that I got out of the hospital, I was writing again. It just fuels you. There's like this internal fire that doesn't go away when you're doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing. And that for me is making music, and that for me is working with people and being hands-on. But it's scary when everything's magically just taken away from you. I didn't want to touch a guitar when I was in the hospital. I was scared to. I didn't have it. But as soon as I had the strength, I went back to writing, and I went back to creating, and I went back to making music. That's why so many people are featured on the first album, is because I wanted to make memories with everybody. I wanted to make these like lifelong, like tattoos, you know, for everything, for everyone to carry. So to finally be able to be creative again after being in the hospital, it was almost just like, we can breathe again. Like, I still had more to do. And I think that's how, it's like knowing that I still had more to do pulled me through that. I think that's it. Imagination, honestly, is the most powerful thing, because it's dangerous and scary, and it's almost unlimited. And somehow we get in our own way as humans, whether that's through our minds or bodies or whatever it is. But so much power comes when you get out of your own way. And if you can line up with what you imagine all the time, or you can sync that up, like, you're almost an unstoppable force. And so many things happen when you step away from your barriers. We create our own barriers, and it's almost like being a little kid. You imagine all these things, and you imagine this and this and this, and you literally imagine everything that you want to do. And then as you get older, you kind of start limiting yourself. But there's something so powerful about your imagination and your dreams and everything that's internally always going off. And if you can, once you start chasing that and start aligning with that, you feel so connected with what you're supposed to be doing on the earth. And that's really what it feels like when I do music and speak to people about mental health and everything else. Like, I feel like I'm finally doing what I'm supposed to be, what I was completely carved and created to do. And sometimes that's just following your imagination. COVID isn't over, right, technically, so I think that threat's kind of always in the back of my mind, because I don't know what my body's going to do again. Because what happened when I had COVID itself wasn't that bad. It was a month later that my organs started failing. It was this thing called MIS-A that 1 in 30 people in the entire country last year had that. Like, I was one of 30 that had that reaction. So in my headspace, I always think about COVID. I mean, you have to. But I swear, the morning that I got to leave Morgantown from being on life support and all that, and the day that my album came out in August of 2021, August 13th, the sun was I have pictures from my apartment and from the hospital room. The sun and the clouds and every single bit of the sky looked exactly the same. And I've seen that, and something about that just said, you're supposed to be doing what you're doing. And I went from literally dying to waking up months later and the sky looked exactly the same. And I thought that was a perfect day, because that to me resembled like we got more stuff to do. I've seen and lived my most perfect days already, and they involve being around people that love and care about you, no matter what context.